Namaste, everyone. Michelle Granberg here. Welcome to another episode of Positive Energy, promoting a world of empathy and compassion for humans and animals. On this show, we're talking about domestic violence, which is violence committed by someone in the victim's domestic circle. Author and advocate Jen Gardella is here to share her story of survival. Stay where you are, because Positive Energy starts right now. Welcome everybody to Positive Energy, and so I'm here with Dr. Jen Gardella. And so Jen, we've known each other for a long time.
Since 2006.
Yeah, like full transparency, that's what everybody says. Like, who cares anyway, right? No, it's good, but so you're here today because you've written a book, and we're gonna dive into a bit of a serious topic.
We are.
But our aim is to give people help and hope. So tell us a little bit about your story of surviving domestic violence and what led you to write this book, Listen for the Whispers of Abuse. Such a compelling title.
Right, so thank you. At the beginning of Domestic Violence Awareness Month in 2022, so last year, I sat down and I said, I want to help people. I had survived domestic violence, and when I was living in the abuse, I actually didn't know I was living in abuse. I thought he was just a jerk, he needed to calm down, or it was my fault. Very typical things that people say, that victims and survivors say. And I said last year, you know what? I'm gonna share something on social media every day about my experience and what I learned about psychological and emotional abuse. And I thought, a post a day, that's 31 posts, maybe someone will respond to something. And managing them became a full-time job. I received private messages, comments on the post that were so raw and authentic, text messages, phone calls. I had no idea you lived through this. I'm living through this now. He's still stalking me. It was frightening what people were telling me out there. So at the end of the month, a friend of mine who's a psychologist said, where are you getting this information from? I need it for my clients. And I said, it's my story. And my very good friend, Mary Fran Bontempo, who's also a writer, said, publish it. People need to hear it. You can save lives. I actually say those exact words in the book. That's how this came about. And it became very important for me to share what I had learned. Because again, when I was in the abuse, I thought domestic violence was only broken bones and bruises. I had no idea about screaming and reactive abuse and love bombing and hoovering and all of those other things that we talk about in the world of domestic violence. I had never heard of them before. So that was what started this.
Yeah, quite an education. And talk about like turning your pain around into something that you can pay forward now.
Right.
You know, that's really the silver lining in some of that, but I know it's all in the book. Is there any little vignette or anything that stands out that you can share with our viewers about your journey and how you started that and where you are now?
I think the most impactful part for me about learning about abuse was something called reactive abuse. And this is when an abuser purposely picks a fight with you. You probably know what this is because of the work that you do.
Yeah.
But an abuser picks a fight with you, and then their goal is to get you to react in such a way that you look like the crazy one. And I can remember when I was working with my trauma therapist after I had escaped, and she explained that pattern to me. Jen, this is what he was doing to you. And I sat back and said, now it all makes sense. Because that is what would constantly happen. He would either, like I said, want to pick a fight or get triggered and come after me, having no idea where he was coming after me verbally and emotionally. And then I would wind up hysterical, and suddenly I was the one with the problem. And it was that pattern that I was able, looking back, to see so crystal, you know, so clearly.
I'm sure looking back, it's a whole different view, right? And you probably say, how did I not know? What was I thinking? But at the time, right, he worked hard to sort of normalize it, you know, and so to kind of backtrack and define like domestic abuse or domestic violence, are the two terms sort of used interchangeably, or do you see them as two different things or the same?
So I use them, it's just all domestic violence.
Yeah.
There's no, oh, this is less domestic violence or sort of domestic violence. It's all domestic violence. And my big saying is love shouldn't hurt. If someone is hurting you on a daily basis, physically or emotionally, that's domestic violence. When we talk about physical abuse, that's always, out of the box, one instance, always domestic violence. When we talk about other forms of abuse, though, there needs to be certainly a pattern. So if you and your husband fight over the credit card bill because one of you went over budget, that's not necessarily financial abuse. That's a miscommunication, or, you know, that's just standard marital issues. You may need to see a therapist, but whatever. But what we're talking about when we talk about domestic violence and abuse is a systematic pattern of controlling behavior. They want to control and dominate your entire life. And they tear you down. They tear down your self-esteem. They tear down every part of your life as much as they can until you're literally left with nothing.
Yeah. Right. So, and that's never okay. So that's one of the hallmarks. Tearing someone down doesn't belong in a relationship.
Exactly.
You know,
that's
versus,
not healthy.
Yeah, it's not healthy. Yeah. So then, you know, as we open people's eyes, as you want to open people's eyes, as your eyes were open, what are some more of the warning signs? So that if someone's experiencing domestic violence right now, also, what is the first thing for them to do if they say, hey, I think this is me?
Yeah, great question. First of all, the warning signs are, do you not feel safe and stable in your relationship? So if you're always, and there's chapters about this in the book, because this is what I went through in trauma counseling. So if you always have a feeling that you're walking on eggshells, if nothing that you do is ever good enough, if he's always screaming at you and you are apologizing, but you have no idea why, and then a word that's being thrown around a lot right now in a really good way is the term gaslighting. So if he's lying, you're making that up, you're crazy. These are all really good indications that you are living in domestic violence. And the very first thing that you should not do is say, you're a domestic violence abuser, or worse, you're a narcissist, because they will pummel you for that. You almost won't recover, right? So the very first thing that someone should do is sit with some awareness and do a little research. And besides my book, there's plenty of resources on the internet.
Yeah.
I read a lot of them.
Tons.
There's Facebook groups that you can join, but do also something that is safe. Make sure that where you're searching from and the device that you're searching on, that they can't get access to what you're searching on. That's critical. There's keylogger software. People can track what you're doing, and we don't want to put any victim in an unsafe situation. And then the other resource that no one knows is available to them is every county has some domestic violence resources across the United States.
Yeah.
So you can,
especially if you're near a city.
exactly, there's 4 or 5 in every city, right?
Yeah.
So you can call the National Domestic Violence Hotline. They can counsel you as well. They're there for you 24/7. So you can just call there, do some safety planning. But you can also establish a confidential relationship with your local domestic violence center.
Yeah.
And one-on-one or in support group, get ideas on safety planning. If this happens, how can I get out?
Right.
And walk through the steps of, and I did not have the luxury of doing this, but walk through the steps of, okay, what is this going to look like for me if I get out? Because you just don't get in your car with your stuff and leave. You have to have a place to go. You have to have a safe place to go. And you have to make sure that that place is going to be available for you. You know, so there's all of those things that you can manage before the urgency of, we're leaving, let's go.
Right.
And also, domestic violence centers, and when I was in support group, there certainly were a lot of women who were still living in their abusive situation, but were with us for the support. They weren't ready to get out, and it takes a victim 7 times to leave. So she may be at a place where she's trying, thinking, it's okay no matter where you are.
Yeah. Yeah, I understand it's fairly common, certainly the victims hesitate, and that often they return to the abuser several times. I know that that's pretty common. But going back to gaslighting, because just to talk about what that is a little bit further, because you're right, these days there's less shame around the psychological jargon is talked about in such a good, better mainstream way.
Yes.
There's so much more awareness, there's so much more of a sharing, of their experiences, probably because of the internet and how easy it is to share. But gaslighting basically, right, is a form of manipulation in that the person is deliberately trying to get the other person to doubt themselves or think that they're crazy or think that what they saw with their own eyes, that they're just wrong or they're making it up or they've twisted it. Is that your definition of gaslighting?
Absolutely. They want the other person to continually doubt themselves. So it's a lot of, that didn't happen, you're making it up, I never said that, you're lying.
Yeah.
And so the
even in the face of evidence, even.
Right. And the victim target is sitting there saying, no, you said we would leave at 2 and that we were going food shopping or whatever it is. And so, and it's big and small. It can be any sort of event, thought. Nothing is, he wants to keep his victim very unstable.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds really sick, obviously, and really, really cruel to play games like that and to mess with someone's mind.
And a waste of time.
Yeah, what good can come of it? There is all of that. So then go back to why do victims in general hesitate to leave? Why do they return? I know that there's often, sometimes it's more dangerous to leave, or sometimes an abuser will take it up a notch when the person leaves. What do you say to that?
So first of all, there's a lot of barriers to leaving. So I am a female who had a male abuser. In my particular situation and case, and for a lot of women who are leaving, there is a financial issue. If you are on a mortgage and don't have an income or have a limited income, you can't just go rent an apartment. So where are you and your children going? And children then also become a barrier, because if he is their parent, I was lucky that he was not my children's parent, but if he is, he has rights as a parent. And so that becomes very tricky, because now the victim says, well, wait a minute, if I leave him, my kids are going to go there alone and be with him alone. And that is scary. And one of the things that's become very prevalent in the world of domestic violence, I'm now being trained as an advocate by my domestic violence center, are pets. You leave pets behind. So now there's pet abuse going on, or domestic violence towards animals. And so there's all of those issues. Also, the gaslighting continues and the abuse continues, because he does this phenomenal job of making sure that everyone in your life believes you are crazy. He will knock on the doors of your friends, your employer, your clients. He will stop people on the street out of nowhere, want to talk, do you know what I did for her? And he creates a circus. So if she can get beyond the financial issue of it, there also is this whirlwind of insanity that's easier to control if she just goes back. And that's one of the saddest points of all, is that she goes back in, she loses the support of friends who now really think she's crazy for going back in, family court judges, if she has wound up with a restraining order and in court, they're like, you went back, why did you do that? So,
that's good. Victim blaming, victim shaming. Yeah.
Right. The police look at her and say, wait, we were here last week. Now you moved back in. Are you crazy? So there's all of those pieces that go into it as well. So that's why victims go back.
Yeah. It's exhausting, mentally, physically, emotionally, draining for everybody involved. And so it really makes us, the profile, there's no one profile I know of a victim, and there's no one profile of an abuser, certainly. But if we talk about the abuser who is responsible for their behavior, there's no excuse, and there's, but to sort of look at that, then what's the psychopathology behind that? But neither of us are experts all the way, but is it possible for an abuser to change? Of course, that is dependent on so many factors.
Right. That is a great question. And when I just started to dip my toe into the world of advocacy when I was ready, my first goal was to really heal the abusers, because that would solve the problem. Right? It's like if you fix the leaky pipe under the sink, you stop the leaks. Well, I then learned these magical phrases where you're not responsible for anyone else's happiness, you're not responsible for anyone else's healing, and as you know, people need to want to participate in their own healing. and abusers think that they walk on water. There's nothing wrong with them.
Yeah.
It's everyone else in the world has a problem.
They have like an exaggerated sense of self, sort of.
Exactly.
Which is another symptom of other things.
Right.
Yeah.
And we can't, there's no education that we can do. They would read this book and say, well, that's not me. I don't do anything. All of these things are her fault. And so there was no way that I was going to be able to heal the abusers. So then I went to educating and empowering victims and the people around them.
Mm-hmm. So in that vein, if someone wants to help a friend or family member who they suspect, they believe, they see all the signs of them being abused, what can they do and what should they not do?
So the first thing that they should not do is hit the poor victim over the head like you're being abused and we need to get you out right away.
Right.
Because more than likely the victim is trauma bonded, which we haven't talked about yet. She believes it's all of her fault, and she's going to run back to her abuser and say, you need to stop this. So that's not a good idea. So again, what we want to do is we want to, first of all, get educated yourself as a friend. That's a critical part of it. And at the end of every chapter, I do give advice on things that you can do and say, and also what not to do and say. Your victim is living with a tremendous amount of shame. So don't say things to her like, I would never put up with this. How can you keep your children in this? Because more than likely, she's sharing little stories with you to try to get you to realize that she wants you to help her. So she's reaching out with these inches and she's asking you to kind of pull her back along the way, pull her up along the way. You, as anybody, can call their local domestic violence center and get help with this issue. They are there for us to, hey, I want to talk to my friend, my colleague, my loved one. I want to talk to a client. I want to talk to anybody about what she's living with. Here is what I'm seeing. What are the words?
Absolutely. There's expert help available. There are professional available. Thank goodness this day and age. There are systems in place. So, I mean, it's making me think, just first and foremost, do a lot of active listening.
A lot of active listening.
Do a lot of create safe space. That person doesn't have safe space. Really create safe space. Let them hear themselves, what they're saying. Let it be mirrored back to them as they hear themselves speak.
Tell me more.
Yeah,
Just
tell me more. Tell me more
I'm
about
here
that.
for you.
How does that feel? Yeah. So then defining these terms even a little bit further, because it may be the first time people are hearing these terms like trauma bonding and love bombing. Love bombing sounds like this should be a good thing. No, not in this context. So what is trauma bonding, first of all?
Okay, so trauma bonding, we actually have to explain love bombing first because it makes sense with trauma bonding.
Okay.
So love bombing is a process when you first meet your abuser and everything is wonderful. He drives to your house and he landscapes your lawn on Mother's Day. He does all your landscaping on Mother's Day. You get expensive gifts, you're whisked off on vacations. It's great. You want to go to New York City? We will go and walk around New York City and have bad Chinese food. That's what you want to do. You get flowers sent to your office, all of that. Trauma bonding and love bombing is a process that the abuser uses to make a victim believe that their relationship will last like this forever.
And if not authentic or genuine,
no, not at all.
Form, especially right in the beginning when you barely know each other, that maybe that's a sign as well, different a little further into the relationship, but they have a goal in mind. They're thinking ahead to, I'm going to use this to hook this person in, and then the abuser in them shows up.
And that's the trauma bond. So what they do is they drip in very micro forms of abuse. So it starts with comments, it starts with questions, a little bit of demeaning behavior, wait there for me, do you know how lucky you are, why do your kids do this, blah, blah, blah. And then back to love bombing.
Right.
Oh, he didn't mean all that, because here we are, we're back in nirvana. And then what happens?
That's more that destabilizing. Very destabilizing. Who's he going to be? Who are they going to be today? I don't mean to keep saying he, because I know, of course,
there are many,
male and female here.
Sure. So the love bombing sneaks in some abuse. We go back to love bombing, but it's not as high. And then he dips us a little lower. Now he starts maybe yelling or blaming or lying. Then a little bit more love bombing. Then now we're getting lower. And also these incidents stretch out. So the abuse becomes more frequent, and the pieces of love bombing become smaller and fewer and farther between until she's down here and nothing she does is right. She's too fat, her hair's the wrong color, she doesn't clean well, her kids are a mess, her business is failing, and he is picking on her constantly. And then the incidents of love bombing are almost non-existent.
Yeah.
She's just living in this
And then
hellhole.
the pattern continues, just the seeking of that relief.
Exactly.
Some little bit of relief, as is there's a diminishment, of that. So it's like this punishment and reward sort of thing where the abuser is, again, using that in a way that is deliberate.
And as I say in the book, you start, as the victim, you start to live on tiny little scraps of love that you believe that you have to earn, and that's not love at all.
Right.
That's not healthy.
Let's go back to basics, right. the very pillars of love, that's not one of them. Love in my life, in my world, is about respect, right, and honor and safety and all of those, and trust. So let's go from there, talk a bit about, and if you don't know exactly, don't,
Sure.
I'm not putting you on the spot, but the demographics, or, sort of, again, there's no typical profile, but is there a common age or common age range or type of relationship or race, ethnicity, economic status that we see, or is it just across the board, anytime, anywhere, any person is certainly, is possible to be exposed to abuse?
That is a phenomenal question, and I write about this in the book.
I know, it's in the book, by Jen's book.
So
Listen for the whispers of abuse.
First of all, 1 in 3 women, 1 in 4 men, 50% in the LGBTQI plus communities.
50%?
50% will experience some sort of domestic violence in their lifetime. It is very high, and it cuts through all levels of socioeconomic status and all levels of education. So if you saw a couple summers ago on Netflix, the hot show was Made.
I have watched that so many times and learned so much from that, and it's typical. It's pretty accurate to reality.
Right. I sat there thinking, watching that show, that was my life, but in a 4-bedroom colonial with a Lexus. But almost everything she experienced, except for the alcoholism, was my life when I lived with my abuser. The isolation that you saw, the control, the manipulation, the loneliness, the escape, where am I going to go? All of it was exactly the same. And what I have learned through A Woman's Place, my domestic violence center, is that there is no profile of your average victim. However, there are some characteristics. So typically, she has no boundaries. Right? So in a healthy relationship, you have boundaries. You have a loving, committed relationship. But you may want to go work on your business, and your significant other may want to work on his or her business. And that's completely legitimate. In a relationship with an abuser, you don't exist in the world except as a pawn for him to control. And the victim tends to allow that. And she has an insecurity about her. So when you ask about profile, it's more, in my mind, from what I understand it to be, it's more of a profile of what she allows and a lack of boundaries in her life.
That make her more susceptible, more vulnerable, more predisposed.
I will never forget when my trauma therapist said to me, okay, we're now going to look at what about you attracted an abuser? And I said, I did nothing to cause this. And she said, that's not my point.
Yeah.
There's something.
It's not about causing it.
Exactly.
It's about allowing, I guess.
It's totally allowing.
Yeah.
Why would you attract somebody that's then going to control you? And you know all about the law of attraction. You attract these things energetically, but also then in the
subconscious,
the way that you act in the relationship. And that was the problem.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's why it's so important to do self-care and to become as resilient as we can be, and to make sure our self-esteem and our self-respect and our self-compassion is really stable.
And find somebody.
Then we attract the same.
Exactly, and find somebody who supports that. That's what it's all about. It's finding someone that's going to fit into your life and not try to control what you want to do.
So speaking of that, if you don't mind sharing, if you share a little bit more about how this experience has affected you it's more now in the long term because it was a while ago, enough such that obviously your life has changed, it's different, you're in a different place. You're like, yes. and you're looking back with perspective and you've written a book, but do you on a day-to-day basis ever like still get triggered or still feel like, oh, there's still those lingering effects, you know? And also you're raising 3 young women.
I am.
So we could talk about that for hours probably.
We could.
And in terms of how, whatever you can share about how that's affected them and all 4 of yours futures.
Right. So it was my girls who got me out. And that's a very critical part of my story because they showed.
Now you're gonna make me cry. That's it.
Sorry, I usually cry if they're in the room and I'm telling the story.
I'm gonna cry at this point. Yeah.
So they came to me and they said, "Mom, we know you're being abused. We're being abused. It's time to leave." And the details will come out someday when I write the memoir. But that's the 30-second version of it. I made sure that they had the help and support that they needed to manage all of the conflicting emotions that they had about that. Is Mom really going to leave? Right? Where are we going to live? What's going to happen? And I'm very lucky in that they saw my moment of leaving as a point of strength. And I've also raised them, like now they know what abuse looks like, and I've raised them never to take it. And I've raised them with the understanding that we have unconditional love in our family. You get yourself in trouble, you come right home. There won't be any yelling. I'll dig you out of whatever mess. You'll have to pay me back, right? I'm not going to be one of these helicopter parents who saves you, but never feel.
But no secrets. Let's not keep secret. Let's not have shame.
Right, unless you kill one of the other
judgment.
Sisters, right? That would be bad. But
then you're in trouble.
Sometimes understandable, but anyway, you know. We're a family of unconditional love, and that is so important. And I've raised them to be, you go and throw your own brass ring on the carousel. Like, I care that you're happy, but you go and chart your own destiny. It's not mine to control at all. So they didn't grow up with a lot of, you have to do this or you have to do that. You had to do chores, you had to be on a team, you had to do decent in school. But beyond that, and they're all thriving because of that.
Yeah.
You know, they have very strong boundaries. Even with me, I'm like, wait a minute, I don't want you to have strong boundaries with me. I'm your mom. And they're like, you know, need some space, Mom. I'm like, that stinks. So that's how
this is good for parents to hear that you can show as a parent your own weaknesses as well. Your children can learn when you show, I'm not perfect and I make mistakes and here's what I'm going through. And hey, can you guys help me? You know, can we support each other? You know, that it goes both ways.
It gave me the opportunity to look at my girls in the eyes and say, I am truly sorry. Because another part of our story is that their father passed away. They didn't have another parent protecting them in the process. And I felt tremendous guilt. And I was able to say to them, I am truly sorry. And they said, that's when one of them said to me, Mom, you got us out. You showed us strength. And I was like, wow.
Yeah.
So there's no fault in telling your kids, first of all, that you're not perfect and that you're sorry, what you just said. But also, I then allowed them to kind of figure things out on their own, right? My kids are really independent, and that's because I didn't do everything for them, because I couldn't. I was healing, rebuilding my life under post-separation abuse that was the stuff of horror movies. And so they did have to manage and operate in the world on their own. I did somehow always get stuck moving them in and out of dorm rooms, which is a very exhausting experience. But I was there for the big things, you know?
Yeah.
But with some of the littler things, they had to go out and get it on their own. And that was incredibly valuable to them.
So talk about, you know, support systems beyond your inner circle. How can therapy, obviously you believe in therapy, so do I, obviously. You know, how can therapy help? When should someone go for therapy? What did you get out of it? And I know the term like PTSD, again, I think it's thrown about maybe too much and maybe misused sometimes, you know, to just rubber stamp everyone as PTSD when there's more to it than that. But did you find some of that in your experience?
Yes. So with PTSD and domestic violence, it's actually called CPTSD. It's complex trauma. And it
because there's also childhood PTSD.
Right. Right.
And there's complex
So this
PTSD.
is complex trauma. And it means two things. It's been explained to me both ways. And in the research, it is supported two ways. It means that you've had trauma over the course of a lifetime, certainly that is kind of built on one another, which we see with a lot of domestic violence victims as well. But it also means that the survivor is attempting to rebuild her life without safety, still being abused. And so the trauma becomes like your average, even when someone is a POW, they typically are saved, thank God, and they go home and heal. They're no longer being traumatized in the POW experience. With our victims and even our survivors, some of our victims go back to live with their abusers. The systems send them right back. And that's where trauma becomes very complex.
Yeah, absolutely is, that timeline.
Right, and so to answer your therapy question, again, your local domestic violence center will have all of the services you need or can point you in the direction of services. And I just want to make your viewers very aware of the fact that I received 8 sessions of crisis counseling, 15 sessions of trauma therapy. I did 10 sessions of EMDR, which is an eye movement
desensitization response.
Yes,
Yeah.
where we lower the response, your emotional response to abuse that you experienced. That's critical. I logged into countless support groups.
Yeah.
Critical, and all of that was at no cost to me.
That's great to know that that's available. Of course, I'm sure it's different, case by case and where you live and all of that, but you don't know until you start seeking that there really is help available low cost, as it should be. I think these are the kinds of things, maybe we need more socialism in the way that these are the kinds of areas where we really need to help people who are disadvantaged, and need that help and couldn't otherwise get it. So how about I know this is probably a big topic too, the law as it relates to domestic violence and when to involve the police. I know.
So
that's a lot, I know.
So I am a fan and an encourager of any victim, whether she's living with her abuser or out, keeping an abuse file. Just keep a file, again, safely.
You mean document?
Document every single incident. That is very important. I kept mine locked.
Admissible. Yeah.
Right. I kept mine locked in a drawer in my office at a different location than our home. That's a big red flag, by the way.
Yeah,
if you're documenting abuse
that.
incidents, that's probably, you probably got an issue on your hands. And I also kept a Google Drive. Once things escalate, either to the point of physical abuse, a victim needs to find the strength to call the police, because they are penalized through the legal system if they didn't call the police before. Judges will look at victims and say, well, you didn't call the police last time. It couldn't have been that bad.
Right.
Or you don't tell your doctor or whatever. So that's very important. Once you are out and he is still abusing you, harassing, stalking, coming to your home, whatever, again, start a documentation file. Okay. My abuser I'm 3 years out, over 3 years out, 3 full years of no contact. I have not responded to him. And we've reset the clock on harassment because I heard from him again a couple weeks ago. Updated my abuse file, sent it to the detective that I work with, sent it to the DA's office. I wasn't like that, though, when all of this started. I was scared to death. You don't want to poke the bear. And we've got to normalize when someone doesn't treat you well.
Yeah.
You don't have to take it, right? But also people should care, and someone should get involved. After that, the legal system, it kind of depends on what happens to her, right? You go in, some judges say, oh my gosh, a threatening email warrants a restraining order. Others say, well, you're getting divorced. What do you expect? That's what my judge said to me. You're getting divorced. You left him. What do you expect?
Right.
So you never really know. But again, the abuse file will also keep you sane. Because when he said, I didn't do that, you say, on this date, at this time, I received this voicemail. Would you like to hear it? And there's a lot of power that you start to feel in that.
So it's never too soon to create a paper trail.
But safely, especially if you're still living in the abuse. So Google Drive might not work.
If you even think possibly you might need it,
start typing.
That thought itself, start putting in writing, or start telling people you're safe with.
that's another great way to do it. Will you hold this for me?
Right.
Or start confiding in your friend and just say, can you write this down for me?
Right.
And keep it in your desk at work,
Yeah.
or at your home under your bed or whatever. That's a great idea.
Those are great tips. So I don't know if you have this in your head, spontaneously, but in terms of resources, they're probably in the book as well. Hotlines?
There is a national domestic violence hotline number that I don't give out because I don't need to memorize something else. But if you look online,
you can find it.
The very first thing that pops up with
That's
domestic
usually
violence,
the top of the search.
number one.
That's a good place to start.
Exactly.
In addition to maybe locally,
every
searching
county.
for your shelter, local shelter. And people should know that shelters are in undisclosed places, typically.
Yes, and also, as now that I'm being trained on the other side of the process, shelter, so they're centers, they're domestic violence centers, right? And they provide a lot of things. Usually
They may or may not have a shelter attached to it.
Some of them do. They all know, though, where people can get services. Like, you're not alone out there. You're not going to have...
It's a clearinghouse for whatever you need.
Right.
If they don't have it, they'll refer you or tell you or show you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if you call the hotline, usually, if your abuser's been hauled off with the police, this was an example in my training, you have some time to get some things together. And a shelter, being admitted to a shelter, especially one for domestic violence victims, isn't instantaneous.
Yeah.
You really do, you don't need to prove your case, but you will need to talk to a couple of people. You will need to gather your things. It's best if you can go in with clothing. So again, that's safety planning. If you think something is wrong in your relationship and things are escalating, call and do some safety planning.
Yeah.
You may be leaving a suitcase for you and your children at a friend's house. Those may be so that you can grab and go when you need it. You may be keeping more ID in your purse, grab and go when you need it. But there are so many resources for people out there, in addition to YouTube and blogs and groups on Facebook and online anonymous everything that you can do. No one needs to know who you are. You never need to disclose your name.
Yeah, so start reading and researching and educate yourself. Absolutely. So we're gonna wrap it up, and there's so much more, but we'll sort of leave it there. But do you have any kind of final words that you'd like to leave?
I want to let victims know that I stand with them where they are. It's really scary out there when you're living with your abuser and you think it's all your fault and you have no hope for a happy relationship. And then when you even escape and your life has been torn down around you and you're living with shame, if you truly commit to doing the work, you can come out the other side. People meet me now and they're like, oh, you look fine. And I'm like, I was not like this in April of 2020 when we escaped. I was a dilapidated individual. And so it was with a tremendous amount of work that led to the greatest transformational growth of my life. But it's so worth it. And if we normalize help, and if we normalize sitting alone and learning what that feels like, and we normalize rebuilding a life on your own terms and boundaries, you can actually build a phenomenal life for yourself. That's what it's really all about.
You just need to be able to see yourself, start to at least fantasize yourself beyond, there's life after this.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's a really great tip. And anything else, that you want to say about what you do outside of what we've talked about,
Yeah, I'm not going to make that much selling the book. I have a whole other professional life where you've been so supportive of my career, and thank you since the very beginning when I started it. But I am a social media and blogging consultant in my real life. So if people have questions about that, they can go to thegardellagroup.com. If you can't find your way there because you don't remember, it's jennifergardella.com. Or connect with Michelle and she'll send you my way. Yeah. Because everyone knows where I am.
We'll have it here in the lower thirds as well.
Yeah, and, it's an interesting part of my story where I didn't really have a business once I left, and I've rebuilt it. And now I can just help a tremendous number of small business owners with their social media and blogging and help them build their businesses, which is great.
Thank you, Jen, so much. You are an inspiration to all of us. So thanks for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for seeing me again.
We're wrapping up another enlightening show. If you're experiencing domestic violence, you're not alone. Please reach out for help. You deserve to be treated with unconditional love and absolute respect. Thank you for watching. Check out michellegranberg.com, go vegan, and join me next time on Positive Energy.